Having a new F1 game release each year creates a real challenge to innovate, to truly rework its visuals and features. And so with F1 24, we have a more iterative entry this time around. With that being said, there are a few key upgrades. In particular, F1 24 brings entirely reworked tracks, with favourites like Silverstone and Circuit de Spa and more getting major overhauls compared to F1 23. More on that in a moment. Equally, the drivers also get a facelift. All 20 official F1 drivers are scanned in to create a more up-to-date likeness, with improved hair rendering to boot. At its core, developer Codemasters continues to use its Ego engine here, and who could blame them? It's a proven, dependable foundation on which to build the F1 series. It's scalable, it's fully cross-gen, and on PC and newer consoles, it's also capable of ray tracing. Fundamentally, the question has to be raised though, are we getting a next-generation F1 experience out of this engine yet? Visually speaking, is it a radical difference from last year's effort? What's the current state of the game on PS5, Xbox Series X and S? And lastly, how far out of reach are these consoles from PC, fully maxed out with ray traced reflections, shadows, global illumination, and ambient occlusion? Let's find out. A quick summary of what's here first. With F1 24 falling on an even-numbered year, the Breaking Point story mode is given a miss this time. It's chopped completely from the menus. Potentially we'll see the next chapter of Breaking Point return in 2025, but for now, the career mode is the real focus for solo play. On the plus side, new cutscenes are added between each race in the career mode, essentially putting the game's new driver models in clear view. Pick one of the known F1 drivers or create your own, and these moments do a great job of adding some context between each race. On that note, this year's F1 drivers are of course rescanned. They're all remodeled from scratch to better reflect their style in the 2024 campaign. We get more accurate skin and eye shaders. We get a huge improvement to hair rendering, with Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso letting their tresses flow freely. Bizarrely enough, it's clear that the limits of the F1 series hair rendering tech has until now been disguised with, well, hats. They all wore hats, in fact, and finally they're able to take them off. On a more general level, every freckle and dimple is recreated for F1 24, and now the way light interacts with skin and hair creates a much more authentic result. To the track updates next, where a lucky quartet of tracks see a complete overhaul this year. In particular, we have updates to Silverstone in the UK, to Circuit de Spa in Belgium, the Lusail International Circuit in Qatar, and finally the Jeddah Corniche Circuit in Saudi Arabia. All four of these are brought up to date with a meticulous reprofiling of the track layout from Codemasters. Comparing F1 23 to F1 24, elevation changes are factored into every incline, turn, and straight. And so, for example, the opening chicane of Circuit de Spa will handle differently to last year. New materials are deployed for the asphalt, the gravel, and the metal road barriers. We have a fully refreshed layout to the off-track fairings, and even distant backdrop detail like trees and buildings are replaced in this year's edition, or at least embellished with more up-to-date detail. In the case of the Lusail track, there are extra barriers, new curbs, more trees, more stands. And meanwhile, the Jeddah Corniche circuit features a more colourful streak of trackside artwork. Visually speaking, it's not always a dramatic difference on every corner. After all, it must stay in keeping with real-world changes, but where Codemasters has put its energy, it's satisfying to see these tracks modernised. All of which leads us to the situation on PS5, Series X and S. In direct comparison, all three offer an almost exact match in graphic settings. The main discrepancy is that Series S dials back shadow draw and tree LODs, a difference that's only just visible from these bird's eye view shots before a race. Otherwise, all push identical settings. Though as with F1 23, the resolution targets differ. PS5 and Series X continue to run at a native 4K resolution, dynamically adjusting to 1800p lowest when the engine is stressed. The drop in pixel count is seamless, it's invisible in motion, and functions as a pretty sensible fallback to ensure each race always holds at 60 FPS. On Series S, meanwhile, we have again a less impressive 1080p target in place. 1080p is the typical value based on most tests, and in fairness, rarely if ever drops under that target. It's a softer end result on Series S though, no doubt. On the upside, it does at least hold up to Series X and PS5 in terms of shadows, ambient occlusion, and texture quality, and even ray tracing features make the grade on all three. Ray traced shadows, ambient occlusion, reflections, and the recently added dynamic diffuse global illumination all engage on console. The catch, as with last year though, is that ray tracing on console is purely limited to F124's menus, pre-race build-ups, and replays. These moments also often pay the price in performance, with frame rates delving down to the 20 to 40 FPS range. As for actual gameplay, well, that just switches over to the typical rasterized techniques for reflections, shadows, and ambient occlusion. Essentially, once you're revving your car at the starting grid, it's this switchover that makes 60 FPS viable on PS5, Series X, and S. As ever, the PC version is the best way to get a complete suite of ray tracing features in actual gameplay. Here's what we're missing on console, taking PS5 as an example, though this applies to Series X as well. I've a Ryzen 7 5700 PC paired with an NVIDIA RTX 4080. I'm gunning for 4K resolution, all settings maxed out, and have every ray tracing option engaged. As with F123 though, all of this is a bit too much for the RTX 4080 to handle at 60 frames per second, and so DLSS quality mode is necessary here as well. On this quality mode, we're of course in practice rendering the game at 1440p, with reconstruction taking us to 4K. Still, for the sake of comparison, it's all about showing the ray tracing difference. First up, there's the reflections. Once again, the screen space reflection technique used on PS5 looks great on its own terms, with the detail of the advertising boards being reflected cleanly across the wet tarmac here. Sadly though, this SSR approach has limits, especially in simulating material interaction. The oncoming light from those advertising billboards is not being diffused accurately, meaning the mirror image is too bright and simply too clean across the ground. With ray traced reflections engaged on PC, these reflections sit more naturally. The light from each billboard and barrier is diffused by the gravel material beneath as it should be. This creates a more muted reflection, a less vivid but more true-to-life mirroring of that detail. Likewise for ray traced shadows, long shadow lines cast from buildings high above are simply more diffused. They're softer and more natural on PC, owing to the way ray tracing simulates the way shadow detail spreads at range from the occluding object. Last up, the impact of ray traced ambient occlusion and the DDGI is a bit more subtle. In this example, these ray tracing technologies fill out the corners of the cockpit with refracted color and shade from the driver. Again, it's all very subtle, but note the red color bounce on the right side is missing on PS5. These ray-traced extras are of course engaging during the cutscenes on PS5, Series X and S, but are missed in gameplay on the console side. But clearly it's the right trade-off, given that it makes 60 FPS and even 120 FPS on PS5 and Series X possible. A very quick last word on performance. Simply put, there's no problem on PS5, Series X or S in hitting 60 FPS during the tires to asphalt gameplay. Across the board, on every track, these machines truly deliver a solid, unwavering 60 FPS line just like last year. Complex tracks like Monaco with 20 cars in view poses no problem, and likewise, racing in heavy rain doesn't trigger any dips under 60. Even Xbox Series S performs brilliantly here, albeit with that 1080p target. The only problem then, as with F123 last year, is the cutscenes. Too many post-race cutscenes drop into the 20s, and with VSync disabled, we even see screen tearing up and down the frame. It's an obvious blemish on the game, standing out all the more given the solid frame rate during the on-track racing. Any scripted scene or replay tends to descend into these choppy low figures, just as the ray tracing features engage. And that goes for PS5, Series X and S in equal amount. The good news though is that ultimately F1 24 continues to hit the target where it really matters, in gameplay. Every millisecond counts in a pure racing sim in this style, and even with the reworked tracks and drivers, there's no impact to the performance level this year. The turnout for F1 24 comes across as a stopgap entry in the series, one that settles for iteration over outright innovation. The remodeled tracks and newly scanned-in drivers are welcome upgrades this year, of course, but key issues from last year have not been addressed. Namely, the often choppy performance during cutscenes seems to still be in place, where the enabling of ray tracing on console pushes us to seriously low frame rates. It's a surprise, given the polish of the on-track racing on PS5, Series X and S, that these huge drops are being overlooked. Otherwise, the quality of the experience is very much intact from last year. Looking to the future though, we're promised further visual enhancements are coming post-launch, and if it happens to be a substantial change to what we've got in F1 24 today, I'll be sure to report back. Otherwise, the pressure is on next year's entry, F1 25, to show us more ambition to upgrade the console experience, to clean up its rough edges, and to perhaps even integrate some of PC's top-end features, like AMD's FSR in conjunction with ray tracing. But that's all from me today. If you did find this video useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high-quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.